The Cincinnati Bengals have perfect attendance for day one of mandatory minicamp, and Joe Burrow, no shocker here, wants to be the best in the world.
You are Locked On Bengals, your daily Cincinnati Bengals podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What up, Bengals fans, and welcome to another episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Day one of mandatory minicamp in the books. This podcast is part of the Locked On Podcast Network. You can subscribe on YouTube, anywhere you get your podcast. We'll have you covered for minicamp this week. And then throughout the offseason until training camp, you can make us your first listen easily by hitting those subscribe buttons, follow buttons, anywhere you get your podcast. And that'll just make it easier for you to know when we upload our content every day. Hit the bell on YouTube for those notifications, and you can join the Everydayer Club. Those of you that listen to us every day, a couple of my favorite clubs, largely located in Cincinnati, but around the world, full of Bengals fans, global audience, James. Today, we're going to dive into the biggest stories of day one of mandatory minicamp, James, and that starts with perfect attendance, namely, where there was really the only question, Jonah Williams. And as we said, leading up to this day, we expected that he would be there. We expected that he would be ready to go and play right tackle, and said all the right things, held court with the media at his locker. Remember, I said that was a possibility. A little bit interesting that he would talk to the media today, but I guess not shocking either, but good to see that he's back. And honestly, I think he said all the right things. He kind of explained his side of the story, James, but I think he's motivated.
No doubt. And it's funny because for months a lot of people, I think, have heard our podcast, reviewed it on YouTube, and you can just see the comments. And maybe it's just a really loud minority, but there are people that think that Jonah Williams hasn't worked hard and question his work ethic and all of those things. And I asked Joe Burrow about it, and he kind of made a face at me and was about to own me, I think. And I said, well, outside the building, and he backed Jonah. And I think the thing that stood out the most about what Jonah said, and we'll play a clip in just a second, the fact that the front office still hasn't had any communication with Jonah's camp still, that's kind of wild to me. It is. And I think Jonah's agent, and I don't know who Jonah's agent is, and so I'm critical of players. I'll be critical of agents. I think his agent's an idiot for requesting a trade and going public with it as quickly as he did, or she did. I don't know. I don't know his agent. I think that was a bad business move. But I don't blame Jonah for being upset. Every single listener, everybody listening, watching, that has consumed this podcast, both of us, we would all be super angry if we got demoted, if we got replaced, if Locked On comes to me tomorrow and says, hey, you're only doing Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and we're going to have a Tuesday, Thursday. Well, guess what? That's not going to go well, because I'm going to be really, really angry. Spoiler. Hopefully they don't do that. But that's kind of what happened to Jonas. It's like, yeah, we're going to move you to right tackle. And he didn't see it coming, and he was upset. And his agent communicated, at least with the Bengals front office, and at least according to him, the front office didn't communicate back. So I get why he's upset there. That said, I think that he's consistently worked hard throughout his career, but certainly this offseason. And instead of me continuing to ramble on, let's hear from Jonah Williams. This is Jonah in the Bengals locker room on Tuesday afternoon.
The way that I found out, the way the communication happened, because I'm sitting on my couch, my fiance's 40 weeks pregnant. Her due date was in, I want to say, like 3 days. And, I'm rehabbing my knee and all that stuff. And, I found out that we signed Orlando on my phone on Apple News. And I actually had a teammate text me before, and he was like, hey, have the Bengals talked to you? And I was like, no, I don't, have a good one. I didn't know what he meant. And so I found out on Apple News. And so then, the following day, my agent was calling the front office trying to get a hold of someone, and we just I know and he just never got a hold of anyone, and no one responded to us, and I just didn't know what was going on, and I just wanted to hear it from them. And the frustrating thing is that I still haven't heard anything back. We had a request to trade via text, and that's just like, I felt that I've started 47 games, 37 straight, and I felt that if it were communicated, hey, we have the opportunity to sign this guy and we like him, we want you to bump over and play right tackle, I would have, it sucks. Like, it would be hard to hear, but I think in a couple of days I would have been like, okay, let's go, let's do it. And I just never got that, So it was never left tackle, right tackle. I know a lot of people made it out to be that. It wasn't that, there's 64 tackle spots in the league. To have any of them is a crazy, amazing opportunity that I'm super grateful, for the chance. Plan is to play me at right tackle. I'm fired up to do it. Let's go. Like, I'm working my knee. I think I'm going to be cleared soon. I feel great moving around, and so that was never the issue. I know that's kind of how it was made out to be. And it was never like a personal thing. I love all my teammates, love all my coaches, love the team, city, fans. Like, the last couple of years have just been amazing, for me personally and for the city, and we've really felt that. I'm back now, mandatory minicamp. I'm going to be back day one of training camp, before day one of training camp, 100%, ready to grind, ready to roll, and, ready to play where the team needs me.
A few things stand out there. And one of them is when he's talking about the team, his teammates, his relationship with the fans, with the city, the last few years for him. He also said in the same locker room interview session that he wanted to be a Bengal for his entire life. That was one of his goals, and this move was one of the first things that kind of made for his entire career, I should say, one of the first things that made him realize that might not happen, which I'm sure was very jarring for him if that was a goal of his. So we're only getting his side of the story here, right? But if the front office had reached out and contacted him, it would be a really weird thing for him to say they hadn't.
Sure.
Right? So
Agreed.
I think that that's probably true. It's probably a little bit weird for him, for them to just not get any response. And what he's saying he wanted isn't crazy. And I understand from both sides, right? From the front office perspective, how often are they talking to players about their plans? I know that, Mike Brown's out there talking to Joe Mixon on the practice field. And maybe if Jonah Williams was there in OTAs, he would have talked to Mike Brown on the cart, talking with somebody in the front office. Maybe if he was there, he would have had that opportunity. But at the same time, what he's asking for, he said how he thinks he would have handled it, which is, would have been hard for him, but then he would have been ready to go. And he just didn't get that piece of communication, which from a human perspective is pretty easy to understand, right?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. One, and this is where I'll defend the front office. I don't think they thought they were getting Orlando Brown Jr. I think it was such a super random, shocking thing where the Locked On Bengals guys recorded a podcast at 10, and by 10:30, you had the date, the famous date that Locked On Bengals listeners are aware of, and it was one of those things where we were doing an emergency pod, and so sometimes it's so fluid that you can't do it. But after the fact, when Orlando Brown Jr. is all over at one point Sports Center, right? And he's being introduced as a Bengal. At some point, can you just make the call like, hey, Joe, we want you to play right tackle because we've been this close to a Super Bowl. And if you play right tackle, guess what? We think we're going to have our best offensive line, not only of the Joe Burrow era, but since 2015. And I bet after, like he said, a little bit, and this is what happened. I think he is fired up today. I watched him go through different drills and stuff, and we can talk about that aspect too, not just the behind the scenes, what actually happened on the field. But I don't blame the front office because those things are so fluid, and you just want to get it done in the moment. And so that's hard. That's hard for coaches. They're not handling that part of it. The front office has to get the deal done first before you're going to go rustle feathers with a guy that's been started 37 straight games, like he said, and all of those things that he's done for this team and this community.
Going to be interesting. I think that he looked good in the bits that I saw shared on social media and the bit of work that he's done. Obviously, he shared some of his own video from his own workouts as well. He's very confident, as you heard, in being cleared well ahead of training camp. Doesn't sound like he's going to have any issues coming in there. Even talked about, his approach every day is one of a competition anyway, even though this year maybe he's in more of a direct competition. Although he seems very, very confident, I think, that he's going to win that job. I think rightfully so. And we'll see how that plays out. But again, to me, he shared his side of the story, and outside of that said all the right things. He's going to work his butt off. He talked about he's motivated because if he plays well, it's good for him. It's good for the Bengals. He wants to win a Super Bowl. He's going to work his butt off, right? He said that numerous times, and that's the kind of guy he is, as Joe Burrow said, James, and that's what we should expect from him.
Yeah, let's push Joe Burrow back. I know Joe Burrow gets the the headlines. We'll talk about him, but let's discuss some of that on-field stuff a bit more, and not just Jonah, but let's start with Jonah because I do think it's interesting, and so we will go there coming up next. Today's show is brought to you by FanDuel. FanDuel is America's #1 sports book, and yes, the NBA finals are over, but that doesn't mean, depending on when you're listening, that you can't listen or get in rather to the Ellie De La Cruz train right here in Cincinnati. And I know Joe Burrow was asked about De La Cruz, and he's maybe one of these emerging superstars in Major League Baseball. And so if you want to wager on Major League Baseball, maybe you want to get in on some NFL futures action, MMA, UFC, anything in between, FanDuel is the spot to go. And the best part is you're going to get a no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's $2,500 in bonus bets back to new customers. All you have to do is visit FanDuel.com/lockedon to get that no sweat first bet up to $2,500. That's FanDuel.com/lockedon. FanDuel, America's #1 sportsbook.
Let's talk about what happened during the relatively short practice at Paul Brown Stadium.
It was about 90 minutes.
Paycor Stadium. Right. Sorry, the short practice is Thursday. 90-minute practice inside the facility was what I was getting at. It was
gotcha.
In the stadium, not on the practice fields, not in the indoor practice facility. And we got to see Chidobe Awuzie working out on the side. Mm-hmm. We got to see LC, Lel Collins, and Jonah Williams working out on the side. And that was, I think, big for two of those guys. We haven't seen Jonah all year, and it was a big step for Chido. And LC has been kind of in that program. But yeah, let's talk about how they looked, because from what I saw, Chido and Jonah were going through some change of direction stuff, some more high-paced movement work on the side, some more football-looking work on the side, football-related movement, and I thought they looked pretty good.
And I'll post – I have a bunch of clips that I just haven't gone through yet. They'll be up by the time you hear this at allbengals.com. I was impressed with – and I'll get to Chido, but let's start with Jonah. You're right, the change of direction, pivoting, stopping, starting. Basically, some of the side-to-side stuff was like he was taking pass sets and in doing that and trying to get out to the edge to block Myles Garrett and block, some of these higher-end guys. Like that's what he was doing, and he was doing it consistently. And he joked that he was ready to play free safety too if they needed him to, since he was working out with Chido. And I think he looked like he was in good shape, not extra winded, nothing like that. So ready to go. The knee moved well. He was pivoting, stopping, starting, all of those things, not fully cleared. So that's why we didn't see him line up. And we talked about that was a possibility going into Tuesday. But I think just given what the past few months have been with this Jonah Williams topic, Tuesday went about as well as you could ask, because he said the right things. He clearly wants to play right tackle and is hungry to do so. And he knows how valuable it is to the team. And he literally said, I'm up with my newborn, which I can relate to. And I'm working on pass sets on the right side, essentially. I'm working on sets on the right side and doing the technique stuff. And I didn't see any of that on the right side. He only did some of these agility drills and different things like that. But he moved really, really well. And that's the box that you wanted to see, because you want him fully healthy going into this competition. And you're right. He did. I don't think he brushed off the competition, but I think he knows, much like we've said here a bunch of times on Locked On Bengals, that he is the favorite and that he has to handle his business. And if he does that, he will be the starter, and he should be. He should be the starter if he handles his business and shows up and does exactly what the organization expects him to do. That doesn't mean hand it to him, but if he does what they expect him to do, he's going to be probably the best right tackle they've had in a while. Maybe there's an Andre Smith year in there going way back, but even last year, as much as I like LC, he was up and down.
Yeah, I think that if he is the best tackle, he'll have taken care of business and he'll win the job. I do think that the best player, whoever's playing the best at the position, should win the job. I just think that it's probably Jonah Williams right now. We haven't seen enough from LC, right? We don't know what his health is going to be like. He was unhealthy for most of the year last year, played through it, gutted through it. Jonah, similar story. So we'll see what comes out of that. I also thought he looked like he was in good shape. Even like from some of his training videos, was seeing him back down there today. He looks bigger. And maybe that's just training camp stuff. But beside LC, who's pretty big, I thought Jonah looked just as big, side by side from some of what I saw down there. So, you hope that he's ready to hit the ground running. Sounds like he's going to be able to hit the ground running. Taking sets at right tackle, like you said, he said he's been doing it every day, really, since he found out about it, and he was able to do so. And the note about him waking up with this newborn, being up with this newborn and taking sets at right tackle reminds me a little bit of Kevin Zeitler, just always taking pass sets. His wife just posting. It's just funny to me. Like you see these offensive lineman wives sometimes talking about their offensive lineman husbands, and they're just always taking pass sets. And Zeitler's one in particular who, like, his wife would post like, Kevin's taking pass sets on vacation again, that sort of thing. That kind of made me think of that.
Yeah, I will say, just you said you're obviously talking about married couples, and I was thinking, relationships. Him and Frank, Jonah and Frank, had really good. It seemed like really good talk. I obviously couldn't hear it, but they were talking during the walkthrough portion for probably 20 minutes. I mean, for a decent amount of time. And there were starters coming in and out and all of those things. But yeah, he was talking with them. So I think Jonah, that this was a step in the right direction for the Bengals, and fans should be happy. Another step in the right direction was Chido, as you mentioned. And he looks like Chido to me. Now, we're not seeing him do it against receivers, but I watched him, and I forget which coach it was. I need to check the video, but there was a coach throwing to T. Higgins, Jamar Chase, and Tyler Boyd. And Chido was doing his agility drills and clips. And of course, I didn't get this clip. I wasn't recording, but one of the receivers threw it back to the coach, and Chido jumped up, and it was like Dan Horde's clip of T. Higgins a few weeks ago. It was like that, where he jumped up, extended, batted the ball away, and landed. And the guys were like, man, you should have caught that. And he was like, I should have caught that. But he looks like Chido. He was cutting and planning and doing all of those things. So I've said my expectation is for him to be good week one. It's a lot to ask for a cornerback, but I feel really good watching him. No brace, by the way, doing these things. Feel really good about Chido.
Yeah, the no brace bit is interesting, isn't it? Just
it's uncomfortable.
Yeah. And I guess, when there's no contact, but like the first day he's back, because he talked about it, right? The first day he's back doing football-like movements, football-like rehab exercises with the cutting and breaking and doing it on a football field. There was a football involved, people are throwing passes around. He's going through that part of the drill where he's catching a pass at the end of it. That seems like a big step for him. And I agree. He looked like him. He looked very, very good. And that's very exciting for a team that has added depth at corner. Cam Taylor-Britt going into his second year. If they're 4 or 5 deep at corner because they really like Allen George, it sounds like so far, and what he's showing as far as depth. And that'll be an interesting talking point when we get to training camp, Allen George, Sidney Jones, et cetera. That's a very exciting development for the secondary.
Are you saying Chido, excuse me, we're talking so much about Jonah. Are you saying Chido is in fact him?
I mean, yes.
Yeah. No, the answer is yes.
How many hymns are there? You got Joe Burrow, you got Jamar, you got Chido, you got DJ. How many hymns are
The,
on this
the
team?
max is one per position, right? Because there's a hymn at every spot in the league.
Yeah.
I mean, there is. Dude, I think Cheeto is. I'm more and more impressed every time I see him. I don't think he knows how I feel about him, but I think he is so darn good. And I'm trying to be PG here since we bleeped out, but the
Mhm.
the
Yep.
other word that Jonah said. So yeah, I think the Bengals secondary certainly looked good, and we can have more thoughts on the secondary. But let's get to him, the real him, the only him. I think that people are worried about here because it is locked on Burrow. I mean, Bengals will get the Joe Burrow coming up next.
Joe Burrow also had his mini camp presser on Tuesday, meeting with the media on the podium, not at his locker like Jonah Williams did, but this is probably the last we'll hear from Joe Burrow until training camp. And the most interesting thing, we talked about what he had to say about Jonah Williams and the fact that, this team is going to welcome back their guys after business is taken care of. There's no questions about Jonah's work ethic, all those things. But the most interesting thing was, he's asked about his personal goals for the year. And obviously, he said the goal is to be on top. And that goes for the team as well. And he was later asked to clarify, personally, what does that mean for you, Joe Burrow quarterback? And he said to be the best in the world, which is something we've assumed about Joe Burrow for a long time. That competitive drive is there, that Tom Brady mindset, as it were, where they are competitive in every aspect, not just in game, off the field, all those things. And he articulated it today for, I think, the first time. I don't remember him saying it so bluntly before.
He didn't. He hasn't. And he said Patrick Mahomes was the best in the world, and that it really didn't hesitate that it was Pat. But this is the mindset that he needs to have. And honestly, you can't be. They go hand in hand, and I think that's the beauty of it. Joe Burrow, he could throw for literally 7,500 yards and 75 touchdowns this year. But if you don't beat Patrick Mahomes and win the Super Bowl, no one, well, some people here, but no one's going to crown you best in the world. And so I think it goes hand in hand. He's going to have the best statistical year and be in that MVP conversation, maybe even win it, but then also get the final the final job out of the way, which is bringing a Lombardi to Cincinnati. And if he does that, I certainly think it can be a conversation, a real conversation. So there's a chance at that. I think it is a realistic goal. And the one thing that stood out, there were a couple things, but the thing to me that I was most interested in is Joe admitting that this team has more urgency, not more hunger, more drive, motivation, all of those things they've had, but there's more urgency among the guys to get it done this year. And that makes sense with guys like Jonah, who are likely going to play elsewhere in 2024. Tyler Boyd. Who else? Who knows? Chidobe Awuzie is obviously in a contract year. DJ Reader. There's a lot of guys. And so I get it. There's urgency that, they were this young upstart team in 21, 22. It was like, okay, can we do it again? Well, now it's like, all right, it's time to get it done. So I love that they have that mindset.
Yeah, there's that wherewithal that there are all of those contract years. You didn't even mention the coordinators, who every year it feels like one of those or both of those coordinators, offensive, defensive coordinator, even Darren Simmons is a highly respected assistant around the league who has been in head coaching talks in the past. All of those guys at any point in time could join that departure list. And so you've got that continuity this year where the changes to the starting lineup are relatively minor. You got a new left tackle, you got new safeties, you have some depth pieces that have been added into the mix as rotational pieces, but the urgency does make sense. He also mentioned that he feels like they're further along this year, just another year in the same system, that, the familiarities continue to grow. There's the continuity aspect of it seemed like it made him feel more confident in where they were this year compared to last year. So that could just be, you say those things, right? To some degree, like there's going to be some lip service this time of year. This is best shape of my life season to kind of quote an aphorism. Aphorism? Is that? It's a trite saying is what I mean. Aphorism might not be the right word. Anyway, point is you hope that all that's true and they just get to training camp at this point ready to go, because that seems to also be the goal for a lot of these veterans at this point. Because Burrow said, the biggest benefit to this part of the offseason is getting the guys together in the locker room, especially the new guys, but building that chemistry and those sorts of things off the field.
Yeah, I agree. I think that's a big part of it is just getting Nick Scott and Dax Hill and Tyson Anderson up and running together as a unit with Jordan Battle. Like, just to look at one example, having Jonah Williams, who, by the way, did talk about Orlando Brown Jr. and vice versa. And it's not like they're going to hate each other. They like each other. It's business. That's completely separate. And I do think you can separate the two things, because the team aspect, and it goes hand in hand. Team does well, right? Joe Burrow throws for a lot of touchdowns and Jonah Williams keeps him upright. Everyone's going to be happy, and the team is probably going to win. So I think Jonah knows that. I think the team knows that. And in this camaraderie, the culture, all of those things, it's wild to see, because I was there long before it was like this. And it's much, much different. Something like this Jonah thing would have derailed other teams. Jesse Bates last year would have derailed other teams, or certainly set them back multiple steps. And Jonah showed up today, and it just kind of felt like he was always there, and the guys were accepting. And I haven't heard one bad thing about him, right? And the same thing goes for, we've talked a lot about Joe Mixon. Haven't heard one bad thing from teammates about Joe Mixon. They're just a really, really tight group. And I think that's why there is that urgency, because they know they're special and they have a shot to get it done.
That's right. Any other standouts from the practice itself? Any Brad Robbins notes for me, James?
Oh man, nothing specific, but I got to be honest. I was locked on man bun Jonah.
Yeah.
I was looking at Cheeto, seeing how he was doing. Lael was working directly with Nick Cosgray. He is obviously a step behind those guys, but he was working out. So that's certainly a step in the right direction. No, I mean, nothing too crazy. It was perfect weather though. Like, if there was, you really couldn't ask for better weather for the day. So that bode well for me and the guys that were actually practicing, but certainly me, which I'm in the me business when it comes to weather.
That's right. And just some things that are maybe obvious or that I noticed in clips that I saw. Jackson Carman, of course, continues to line up with the first team at right tackle. That is expected. There is no other right tackle eligible to start, I would say, currently healthy on this roster. But you shared a picture of the Bengals defensive line, and it was the second team in there at one point. And I don't think Myles Murphy was with them, unless he was at left defensive tackle in that picture. But I think that was Zach Carter. And at left end was Cam Sample. At right end was Joseph Osai. And just a minor note there, because one, it's only one picture. And so it's not like it's a huge sample size or anything like that. But Osai continuing to work on the right side where Trey Hendrickson lines up. And
it was Zach Carter. It was Carter, Tupou, Osai. Yeah. Yep.
Okay.
Just to be clear, I can zoom in on mine. So
yeah, I thought it was Carter there, and Sample's still working on the left side. So I wonder, I guess, did you notice Myles Murphy working on one side or another when you weren't watching the guys rehabbing?
I did not. I'll be honest with you. I didn't much.
You have 2 more days of minicamp.
That was walkthrough too. So there were a lot of guys rotating.
Right.
So it's tough to know for sure. But yeah, they were rotating. And I don't know the exact rotations either, because you're like, first team defensive line was on the side. First team offensive line was in. So keeping us on our toes.
Yeah. I think it's just interesting to watch. Those are the little things that I love to watch in minicamp and training camp, is some of those rotational things. They don't necessarily mean anything, but it can give you some clues about how guys are going to get used. Because one of my hopes, and the reason that the Osai thing is particularly interesting to me, was that Osai would get a little bit more run with Trey Hendrickson on the field, which would mean you would hope that, my personal hope was to see him working a little bit more on the left side as well. And maybe that's still part of the plan, right? Like I said, one picture, very, very small sample size, very early in the off season here. We're not to training camp yet, but that's something that I think I'll probably be watching around training camp, which is why that particular photo stood out to me.
Yeah, I think there's going to be a lot of little things like that we're looking at this year because there's not many huge position battles. And so all of the little things. I mean, there's things with Burrow. We're going to have a lot to discuss on our next show because there's a lot we didn't get to here that I already have. Burrow, the things he wanted to improve on. He kind of acknowledged some of those. And so that's one of the many things we'll hit on Thursday.
Yeah, not nearly enough Joe Burrow content, right, guys? What are we doing? Locked On Burrow podcast, my foot. We're not even close today. We're like Locked On
Bengals.
Bengals?
Locked On
Yeah.
Jonah.
Weird.
Locked On Cheeto. Flamin' Hot Cheetos.
We'll be back to have you covered.
My favorite, by the way, just so you know.
Flamin' Hot?
Oh, yeah.
We've talked about this, right? How I like the jalapeno and you like the
Oh,
Flamin'
yeah.
Hot.
Yeah, that's right. You are.
Yeah.
The jalapeno are fine, but my God.
I mean, people are allowed to have opinions, I think.
Flamin' Hot. The GOAT.
That's going to do it
in
for
the
this
world.
episode of the Locked On Bengals podcast. Bengals have a couple more days of minicamp, and we'll have you covered right here on Locked On Bengals. Thanks for listening to this episode, and until next time, Hoo day, and have a good one.